Hey everybody, John the Other here, obviously. Now in the last decade, many articles and books have been written on the so-called War on Men. Suzanne Vanker wrote the book of that title in 2013. Christina Hoff Sommers wrote The War Against Boys almost 20 years ago in 2000. And I call it the so-called War on Men, but there have been many reasons to use the term if you noticed the rising dislike of men in the last 30 years. But as much as you might point to metrics such as the rates of suicide, homelessness, workplace death, or the acceptability of mutilating children, none of that could dent public denial, which allowed only the answer that women are oppressed, a widely held point of view propped up by repetition in media, which caters coincidentally mainly to women. But you could not point out that men were effectively second-class citizens without risking public scorn, but that has changed now, with the advent of Me Too. What some people are calling a witch hunt, there is a palpable public glee in the rapid-fire destruction of what appears to be all men of public esteem in public life. And the public condemnations of each of these men as they disappear appears based on sexual interactions between consenting adults of as long ago as 30 years, judged through a neo-Puritan gender studies standard. The accusation is the verdict, and if you dare to speak that this is unjust, you will be next. It is also obvious now that the uncountable journalists, commentators, spokesmodels, and varied cheerleaders of the Me Too Time's Up phenomenon are all of them pious frauds. Look at Oprah presenting the Me Too-themed Golden Globe Awards after earning her billion-dollar fortune in 3 decades of kissing the cheek of a man she now decrees the embodiment of toxic masculinity. And the same goes for all of the plunging necklines of the Hollywood women dressed in all black to protest, they say, their own sexual objectification, which their black, sexy, plunging necklines exemplify. No female objector to being objectified thought they might demonstrate not sexualizing themselves by wearing a suit, for example. And to call this hypocrisy is not adequate. But it is very clear that women as a collective have decided that their own expression of sexuality is noble, while expressions of male sexuality are toxic, unless those male expressions are defined by a modern feminist puritanism. It has further been decided by women that they are collectively so fragile and weak and helpless that even requesting their permission to think a sexual thought wounds them into a trance immobility of a mouse feigning death when pinioned in the jaws of a mouse-eating predator. The words, "and I froze," might have a familiar sound to your ear. And within the areas of the courts and law enforcement, the feminist activists have been very busy as well, informing the police with new victim interview techniques designed to bypass inconsistencies and open contradictions in a complainant story. Your city's police are being trained that the indicators of falsehood in a made-up claim should be understood by the police as indicators of truth if the claim is one of sexual misconduct. And in Canada, a law to similarly miseducate judges that contradiction indicates truth is waiting only for a vote from the Canadian Senate, and that bill, C-337, was sponsored by the exiting female interim leader of Canada's federal Conservative Party. Also in Canada, we have a proposed new law which will bar written communication of a sexual nature from entry into defense evidence without first submitting that communication in a pre-trial hearing and exposing it to the complainant with opportunity for them to explain it all away in advance. In each of the high-profile false accusations that have made it into the media, which have then fallen apart in the courts in the last 5 years, the false accuser activist lobby have been learning what undid each of those claimants' lies, and they are now working as quickly as they can to create laws preventing evidence of an accused person's innocence from being considered in the courts. And what about the so-called news? Bloggers who still call themselves journalists, writing for national news organs using the term victim when they should be using the term accuser, or the legal term complainant, after a complainant's story falls apart because it's false, and it is in contradiction of known facts. The so-called news, and I mean here the CBC, the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail, and other national journals, continue to call false accusers victims or survivors, and when the accuser is discredited as a liar and a fraud, as in the case of false accusers like Lucy Ducouture or Mandy Gray, then calling these fraudsters victims in a news publication means you are no longer the news, even if your organization runs on tax dollars like the CBC does. And female D and C list celebrities jumping on the populist bandwagon to boost their sagging and droopy, wrinkled careers, they are not stunning or brave. Not even if a now successful male public figure made some unwanted sexual advance 30 years ago. Jumping on the victim bandwagon because of decades ago awkward sexual behavior just makes you an untrustworthy and creepy grifter, lady. And the cost to this is not just that every man of any success now has a target painted on his back and his career, which could be ended at any time by no more than a tweet or a Facebook posting. The cost is higher than that. Me Too is, of course, escalating and evolving. A collection now of wealthy female celebrities have created a legal fund to finance civil lawsuits against present and future accused men. Imagine for them the intoxicating sense of power that you would feel knowing you could destroy any person of any wealth and any social status. Imagine further if you could do it with no negative consequence to yourself and you were rewarded with increased social status as a stunning and brave victim. The ongoing torrent of accusations appears to have the complete support of all except a very, very small handful of women. And the cost. The cost is not just to the accused men being destroyed regardless of innocence or guilt. The cost is the loss of trust and the loss of goodwill between men and women. This is not a small matter. This trust and goodwill is what allows women to participate in public life, to obtain an education, to enjoy sexual liberation, and to have an expectation of safety when they go out. There is an assumption that all adult men in public are women's protectors, and this assumption is mostly true. But this is not the way things are because of gravity or the speed of light or any other universal constant. Goodwill between men and women is part of what allows Western societies to exist and function, and this trust in goodwill has been part of the social fabric for long enough that it's not consciously recognized. It is an unexamined assumption. In fact, although the ideology of feminism has as its most basic claim the idea that society works on a framework of exploitation and subjugation of women by men, the unreality of this dynamic is revealed in the fact that feminism succeeded in its very first aim of opening public life to women by nothing but persistently asserting that as its goal, which men then passed into law in the form of the 19th Amendment in the United States. Women said, "We want the vote." Men said, "Okay, here it is." Now, it is impossible to understand this while also believing that the culture was then, or is now, organized along principles of the subjugation of women. Indeed, the continued success of feminism in achieving every single milestone by the means of the willing cooperation of men entirely demolishes the notion that a woman oppressing principle plays any part of Western society's operating foundation. In fact, this is revealing of the deep and long-standing goodwill towards women by men in what feminists refer to as a patriarchal society. However, the hashtag #MeToo movement, which began with a distributed public recitation of the sexual misbehaviors of a Hollywood film mogul named Weinstein, almost instantaneously expanded to this non-stop torrent of accusation against almost every man of public profile. And these accusations, although they do include behavior which could be considered harassment or assault, are almost all on a continuum of non-pathological normal flirtation and expression of male sexuality. And in each case, the men accused of either flirting or stealing a kiss or giving a pat on the bum. This results in the termination of these men's careers to the satisfied roar of the female mob. And nobody speaking publicly about this, except for a very few curmudgeons, seems to mention that the guilty parties excised from their careers, cast aside, are guilty by accusation only, and guilty of crimes that are not even crimes. No comment or flirtation is too minor to fuel this elaborate, baroque outrage of women who seem determined to cultivate a weaponized fragility as if it is a virtue. And on top of this, all remembered or half-remembered or pieced together memories of 30-year-old sexual encounters are now being re-examined or perhaps reimagined through the lens of college sophomore victim feminism, in which all 1990s sexual encounters, 1980s flirtations, 1970s romances are all reframed as violent offenses. Nobody can possibly be innocent by such a stupid and mean-spirited standard, which is, I think, the the point. And while I called the referred to apparent war on men by the phrase, the so-called war on men, it's out in the open now. The Me Too movement and the Time's Up Litigation Fund project are very clearly an open declaration of war. There's no more pretend here. Now, pretty obviously, you'll probably still be called a misogynist if you openly state that you have a policy in your company that you don't hire female staff because it's too dangerous to do so. You'll probably be sued, and they'll win. But it is, in fact, too dangerous now to have a female coworker, because the pretense of goodwill by women towards men is gone. There is no more pretending that women are not, as a collectively, actively looking for any faint or half-baked reason to lynch you or destroy your company, to end your career based off an off-color joke that you might have made in the lunchroom, based on an imaginary offense. Me Too is women saying, with an absolute clarity, that if you have anything they covet, like a good job or a career, they'll take it, or they'll burn it to the ground. So, you are going to have your own policies to protect yourself. Your boss is going to have his own policies. And none of it will ever find its way into the company policy manual. And why is it going to be this way instead of just every man will now do precisely and only what women say? There is, after all, a lot of public writing from the point of view of women telling men that avoiding women is not the right answer. Don't protect yourself from accusations by separating yourself from potential accusers. No, the articles say you should just become more of a gentleman. Conduct yourself according to female preference. Hire more women than you ordinarily would. Listen to women when they complain, and you'll be okay. Oh, Lord. Pay no attention to the message of the Me Too movement, which is that every man is now a walking target, and nothing is too minor to end your career. Don't protect yourself, say the articles. Well, sure. I mean, I don't want to tell anybody what they shouldn't or shouldn't do. You know, suit yourselves, gentlemen. But it's time to put something into the open that, although it is not controversial, is not talked about in the mainstream. Women's sexuality is hypergamous, and what that means is women are sexually attracted to men who exhibit the indicators of higher social and economic position. Now, just as men are attracted to women who demonstrate indicators of good health and fertility, women are attracted to men with wealth and social status. Is anybody freaking out yet because I just told the truth? No? Good. Let's continue. In the workplace, whether for you that's a software company or a Hollywood production company or a corporate sales organization, some women, particularly junior women within such an organization, use their sexual value to obtain special favors, to obtain access, to get mentorship, and so on from their male colleagues, particularly older or more highly placed male colleagues. And of course, there are lots of women who don't do this, and who don't use tits and ass to advance their careers. I also know that nobody is more irritated by women advancing their career by trading on sex than their female colleagues who refuse to play that game, or climb the ladder on merit only. Nobody is as disgusted by sexual ladder climbers than the women who don't do that. And if anybody would like to tell me just now that this is not a real thing, save your breath. And on the other side of this phenomenon are men in positions of authority who interact sexually with younger women in a transactional relationship. Sexual access in exchange for career advancement or opportunity. Are these men predators? Are they abusers? Well, if you read the mainstream commentary, then the answer is clearly yes. But the mainstream media version of how reality works is by now obviously quite clearly spin and slant as a version on the story. Why do men like Harvey Weinstein imagine they can engage in sex with much younger, less powerful women trying to make their careers in the entertainment world? Well, the answer is because for their entire lives, a steady stream of younger women have always offered themselves sexually in exchange for roles, auditions, and so on. And this form of trade is not unique to Hollywood, although it might be particularly prominent within Hollywood because that industry trades heavily on the sexual allure of pretty and young people as part of the product it's selling to the public. And of course, all that consensual give and take over the last 30 or maybe 50 or maybe 100 years is being now reimagined through the lens of exploitation, abuse, and so on. And now, if you are not to be publicly branded some kind of monster, you must pretend in public that the victim fantasy version of business as usual is real. and you must pretend to be outraged that all those poor helpless women who launched their careers with a little bit of give and take are in fact victims crying themselves to sleep every night in their Hollywood mansions. That's the game you're expected to play. But you know it's a fantasy. And the open and cooperative environment in the workplace of the last 40 years, in which favor trading even had a possibility of taking place, is now an arena in which men's careers are being terminated as a sport. And this is certainly of no benefit to women who would have formerly climbed the career path by trading on their own sexuality, and it's also no benefit to women who prospered purely on their merits. Both camps in women's world have united now to make themselves a threat to the entire business in any work environment. Women who want to pursue a career in the post-Me Too world are going to have to create their own jobs, their own companies, their own industries, and so on. And it's not because the world of men is against women. It's because women, through consensus with each other, have decided that what they want as the basic relationship between women and men is warfare. So, gentlemen, you don't get to say so openly, but it's open season on you now. Conduct yourself accordingly. And for anybody who'd like to help support this channel, thank you very much for subscribing. There's a Patreon and a PayPal link in the low bar. Thanks for listening. And as always, have a lovely day.